The cabin lights flickered as turbulence rattled the aircraft like a tin can tossed in a storm. Passengers tightened their seatbelts, some whispering prayers, others gripping the armrests until their knuckles turned white. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared in rapid succession, sharp, metallic warnings that cut through the tension like knives. The captain cursed under his breath, wrestling the controls as the plane jolted violently. At that exact moment, the cockpit door swung open and the trainee pilot stepped in, breathing hard, eyes scanning the chaos with trained precision. Before she could say a word, the captain snapped at her with the force of a man drowning in panic. "Get out of the cockpit." Now, his voice echoed through the cramped space, but she didn't flinch. The plane suddenly dropped, slamming everyone downward as oxygen masks shot from the ceiling. In the chaos, only one thing was clear: something catastrophic was happening at 30,000 feet, and within seconds, 241 lives were hanging in the balance. Hours earlier, the flight had begun like any other. A clear morning sky, a routine route, and a trainee pilot assigned to observe, learn, and stay silent. She had walked into the cockpit with quiet confidence, hiding the years of experience she'd gained from a military flight program she no longer spoke about. The captain barely acknowledged her, brushing her off as another rookie who would take notes and stay out of the way. Tension simmered beneath the surface. He believed she didn't belong in real-world conditions yet, unaware of the advanced emergency maneuvers she had mastered long before she put on a commercial uniform. As the aircraft climbed above cloud layers, reports of a growing storm system came through, warnings the captain dismissed with casual arrogance. But she felt an uneasiness gnawing at her instincts, the unmistakable intuition of someone who had seen storms turn deadly before. She watched the clouds darken through the glass, watched the instruments blink tiny hints of trouble, and knew long before anyone else that this flight was about to test everyone on board in a way they never expected. The first jolt hit so hard the overhead compartments rattled, sending a few loose items crashing to the floor. The captain's hand shot to the throttle as he muttered about unplanned turbulence, but the trainee pilot felt something deeper in the vibration, an uneven rumble that didn't match weather alone. A second later, a deafening boom shook the aircraft, engine to burst into flames, sparks trailing behind the wing like a comet. The cockpit erupted with warning sirens, red lights flashing across every panel. Passengers screamed as the plane tilted violently to the left. The co-pilot's voice trembled while reading out altitude loss, thousands of feet disappearing in seconds. She stepped inside the cockpit again, steady despite the chaos. Her eyes darted across the instruments, engine pressure gone, temperature spiking, torque imbalanced. She could see the captain pulling hard on the yoke, trying to lift the nose, but the aircraft fought back like a wounded beast. She knew exactly what was happening: a partial stall forming, the kind that kills aircraft quickly. When she opened her mouth to warn him, the captain barked, "I said out." But she stayed rooted. She didn't raise her voice. She simply watched the angle of attack spike and understood the truth. They were seconds away from losing the plane entirely. Inside the cockpit, the situation deteriorated like a chain of dominoes. Hydraulic pressure indicators flickered in and out, showing levels dropping faster than any checklist could handle. The co-pilot frantically flipped switches, trying to isolate the leak, but the system didn't respond. Electrical current surged and dipped, causing multiple screens to glitch. Speed readings jumped inconsistently to fast, then to slow, leaving the crew blind to their true descent. The captain's hands trembled on the controls as he forced the yoke upward again, desperate to regain altitude. But each pull only made the aircraft shudder louder, warning them they were forcing it into a deeper stall. The trainee watched the plane's nose creep higher and higher, not a sign of recovery, but of fatal error. The engine fire that started minutes ago now sent waves of vibration through the fuselage. She leaned closer, noticing the trimmed wheels spinning out of control. The autopilot had disconnected itself in self-preservation. The co-pilot stammered, "We're losing it, sir, we're losing it." But the captain ignored him, panic clouding his judgment. She saw the left wing beginning to dip, the first sign of a spiral dive. Time was running out. If someone didn't correct the plane's posture immediately, 241 people would fall out of the sky. Her mind flashed back to a hangar drenched in the smell of jet fuel and adrenaline. Years before joining commercial aviation, she had trained in a military program built for emergencies no simulator could prepare ordinary pilots for. She had practiced high-altitude stall recovery, engine-out landings, rapid decompression protocols scenarios so dangerous they were considered classified. She remembered instructors shouting over roaring engines, commanding her to trust physics when fear tempted her to pull up instead of push down. She had mastered maneuvers designed for survival, not comfort. But she left the program after witnessing a training jet go down with someone she cared about, leaving scars she never spoke of. When she transitioned to commercial flying, she hid her past, hoping to build a quieter life. That quiet life ended the moment she heard the engine explode. The cockpit alarms sounded identical to the ones from the airbase, the shaking beneath her feet eerily familiar. Everything she thought she left behind now surged back, every lesson, every drill, every shouted command sharpening her instincts. She knew exactly what the plane was doing. More importantly, she knew exactly what to do to save it. And she knew the captain, trapped in fear, didn't. The trainee took a single step forward, her voice calm but firm as she said, "Captain, you're forcing a stall. We need to lower the nose." The captain, sweat dripping down his forehead, snapped back, "I'm not letting a trainee fly my aircraft." His grip tightened on the controls as if letting go would kill him instantly. The plane tilted again, sending the co-pilot bracing against the panel. She didn't hesitate when the angle of attack indicator spiked into the danger zone. She reached out and grabbed the captain's arm. He jerked back, shocked. "What do you think you're doing?" She didn't back away. "Saving your aircraft," she said, her voice steady even as the plane dropped another 100 feet in seconds. The aircraft lurched to the right, and alarm screamed louder. For the first time, the captain saw the fear in the co-pilot's eyes, fear directed not at her, but at him. The realization hit him. He was losing control, and the trainee was the only one still thinking clearly. He reluctantly loosened his grip. It wasn't approval, but it was permission. She slid into position, hands locking around the controls with a certainty that made both men stare. In that instant, she was no longer a trainee. She was the only pilot on board who understood how to keep them alive. The moment her hands touched the controls, her training activated like a switch. She pushed the nose down, counterintuitive, terrifying, yet the only way out of a stall. Passengers screamed as the plane dipped sharply, but she ignored the chaos behind her. Her focus stayed on the instruments, reducing drag, balancing the thrust from the remaining engine, and stabilizing the airflow over the wings. She feathered engine 2, cutting the flame's influence, then tapped into rudder control to counter the asymmetric thrust. The co-pilot called out, airspeed rising slowly, painfully but rising. She adjusted the trim with quick, precise movements, guiding the aircraft out of the death spiral forming seconds earlier. At one point, the ground loomed through the windshield, too close for comfort, but she knew the exact altitude threshold for recovery, and she hit it. Just as the stall warning cut abruptly, replaced by the steady hum of stabilizing airflow, the plane leveled out. The cockpit fell silent except for the rapid breaths of the crew. Even the captain stared at her hands, disbelief etched across his face. She had just executed a maneuver that most pilots would never dare to attempt, and she did it in seconds. Once the aircraft stabilized, the co-pilot looked to her as if awaiting orders. She took a breath, steadying her voice, and declared a mayday to the nearest control tower, listing engine failure, hydraulic instability, and current status. The captain listened quietly, now no objections, no ego, just the weight of what nearly happened. She adjusted their heading toward an emergency airfield, guiding the plane through fierce crosswinds while keeping constant pressure on the rudder to offset the dead engine. The passengers prayed, cried, whispered messages to loved ones, unaware that the person saving them wasn't even supposed to touch the controls that day. As the runway came into view, she lowered the landing gear manually, overriding the warning lights flashing about hydraulic inconsistencies. The descent was rough, the plane wobbling under uneven thrust, but her corrections were swift and surgical. The wheels slammed onto the runway, bouncing once before gripping hard. Fire crews chased alongside as the aircraft screeched to a stop. Inside, passengers erupted into sobs of relief. The co-pilot lowered his head into his hands. The captain exhaled shakily, finally whispering, "You saved them." All 241, but she didn't celebrate. She simply released the controls with quiet resolve. Because she hadn't flown for glory, she had flown because no one else could. The runway lights glimmered through the early morning haze as the aircraft finally came to a halt, the tires screeching and sparks briefly flying where metal met asphalt. Inside the cabin, a tense silence gave way to a collective exhale. Passengers stared at each other wide-eyed, some weeping quietly, others clutching their loved ones, realizing the disaster they had narrowly escaped. The co-pilot leaned back, his hands trembling as he processed what had just happened. The captain, once so rigid and commanding, stood frozen, eyes fixed on the trainee who had taken control without hesitation. He stepped forward slowly, swallowing his pride, and whispered with awe and guilt, "I should have let you fly sooner." "You saved them all," she didn't respond. Her hands still tingled from the rapid movements, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from her body, but she only nodded slightly and began gathering her gear. Outside, emergency crews swarmed the plane, but she stayed focused on her exit, never looking for applause or recognition. Passengers began to spot her through the cockpit window, some rushing to salute or thank her, but she waved lightly and turned toward the terminal stairs. As she disappeared into the mist, her figure framed against the rising sun, one truth remained with everyone who had witnessed it. Heroes don't always arrive with accolades or names in the headlines. Sometimes, they step into danger quietly, act with precision, and leaving behind a legacy that will never be forgotten. The world may not know her story, but the 241 lives she saved would carry it forever.